The highly anticipated latest episode of the Podcast P with Pual George has officially dropped, diving into what went into him leaving Los Angeles and electing to come to the Philadelphia 76ers. In this video, I'm going to break down the most notable quotes, what has me particularly fired up about Pual George's outlook and what brought him to the Sixers, as well as how this whole situation came about. So I want to break this down and start off with kind of the look into the contract negotiations, and to note this especially, this is the part of the players being involved in media that I think is extremely cool. That seeing the curtain pulled back in a way that we've never truly seen before and having access to this type of information to me is very valuable and really tells the story in a way that has not been the case in many past years. That we always hear about the contract negotiations breaking down, but actually see a firsthand account of what those numbers look like, what the feelings were, and what was the case. I thought it was really cool to hear from Pual George in this episode. So to give kind of a quick summation of those contract negotiations with the Clippers, that this starting back in October, that Los Angeles' first offer was for 2 years and $60 million. He asked for the same contract as Kawhi during the regular season, which the Clippers did not bow down to and give him there. He also asked for 3 years, $150 million with a no-trade clause, which is essentially just about what Kawhi Leonard agreed to, and they were not willing to give that no-trade clause. And his final ask was for 4 years and $220 million, which we do know is a shade above what the Sixers ended up giving. I'm going to dive into that specific number for what he signed on the dotted line with this Philadelphia 76ers team. It is a 4-year deal worth $211.5 million. This year coming in at $49.2 million with a player option for the fourth year for $56.5 million there. What I took away mostly from this conversation with Pual George is this was less about the dollar amount and the money and more about him getting his feelings hurt from that Clippers organization. Now, to defend the Clippers a little bit here, it is a different talking point having these negotiations now versus that first offer of 2 years and $60 million, which surely is not the amount that Pual George was seeking, and ultimately he ended up signing for nearly double that value there. That came at the point where Pual George had not proven that he can reliably stay healthy, that he played 74 games this year, which is the most that he's ever played in a Clippers uniform, and been quite some time which he's touched anywhere near that type of number. So the conversation does change when you start proving that you can stay on the court and have a very efficient season, which he did this year. Now, he also mentioned about the Warriors conversation, which I did think was interesting. That was a large talking point and seemingly the other destination that was in the mix. And he did speak about wanting to go to the Warriors and ultimately how that break down. So he said, Pual George admits that he was almost traded to the Warriors, saying, quote, "That was a real thing that was close to being done. That deal was close to being done from what I was being told on the situation." Pual George talked a lot about wanting to stay in Los Angeles. We know that was the ultimate goal when he initially signed with the Clippers, but I wanted to put out there that all is forgiven in that. I do think that this was much about him not feeling to be valued by the Los Angeles Clippers organization, and that is what poked the door open for the Sixers to be able to walk through and hand him that deal with the high-level professionalism and Pual George forcing every member of the Sixers organization to take their shoes off at his door, which was very fun to me as well. But he also talked a lot about the Sixers team and what drew him here beyond just the number. He had this quote for why the 76ers, why it appealed to him, and he said, quote, "One of the best young point guards in the league, one of the best, if not the best, big in the league. Based off the meeting, I did feel like this is where I'm supposed to be." And he also went behind the scenes for how that meeting went. One of the cooler parts of it, in my mind, was talking about the pitch from Dr. J, talking about during his time with the Sixers, that he made it to the championship in back-to-back years, made it to the finals, had a chance at it, and lost both years. And then in came Moses Malone, and that was the difference maker. That was the missing piece. That is what got that era of Sixers team over the edge. And Dr. J believing that Pual George can be that for this version of the Sixers team. I think it's very cool for starters that Dr. J's even involved in the Sixers organization to the extent that he is. It's very cool to me that to take a famed legend, a guy with all the accomplishments that he does have and represents the organization in such a positive way, for him to still be such a face and a voice and take part in these types of meetings, I think is really powerful stuff. And it certainly was something that appealed to Pual George and particularly his father. He talked about what a fan his father was, them getting a chance to chop it up, take a couple pictures, and all that types of things there. He also revealed what number he was wearing, and this has become pretty much common knowledge at this point. The Sixers organization did jump the shark a little bit and put this out before it was released on the podcast. They might have to get this figured out and, this content management between the two of them, but ultimately it will be PG8 for the Sixers wearing number 8. He has, of course, worn number 13 and 24 throughout his career, both those numbers being retired in the Sixers organization, and of course 24 being retired league-wide for Kobe Bryant there. But he talked a lot about beyond that with the contract. They asked him any other players, they talked pretty heavily about Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, if there are any other players that he is excited to learn more about or be a part of, and he had a cool answer about Kelly Oubre on this one, saying, I love his competitiveness. I love his tenaciousness. I'm looking forward to lining it up with him. We always seem to get into it when we play, but he's one of those players that I look forward to competing with. I do love this little storyline there, and it is funny to me that there's two different altercations between them in their career. Neither of these players playing for the Sixers or with the organization at that point in time, but with Oubre and Pual George basically getting into a shoving match and going chest to chest, and that's just good competition right there. I like that in guys, and it is cool that they're going to step to the same side of the turf now and compete together. And we also saw the Caleb Martin signing is another guy that's going to be very much one of these nasty competitors. And I think that's even more important when talking about the Oubres and the Martins of the world, because when you do think about these Sixers big trio with Tyrese Maxey, with Joel Embiid, with Pual George, the unfortunate reality to an extent here is they're all nice guys. These aren't the down and dirty, get gritty, get nasty type guys. Embiid certainly more than the other two, I would say. But it is nice to have that kind of balance where these role players are the get nasty types. And I do think that is helpful for rounding out the roster as a whole. So it was cool to see Pual George show a little love to Kelly Oubre, who certainly has shown that in a Sixers uniform. He also mentioned, don't forget the legendary moment from Kelly Oubre where he called every member of the ref and their family a curse word following the Sixers essentially getting screwed out of a game for some missed calls down the stretch. And that really being the deciding factor, not that game specifically, but if one game or two games break their way, we're not having the conversation for them having to fight their way out of the play-in last year. But that game in which Kelly Oubre and Nick Nurse certainly lost their cool and let the referees have it, deservingly so, following the game, that was against the Clippers. So Pual George was able to see that on full display. He also mentioned that he's already gone golfing with Nick Nurse, that they've spoken quite a bit, so it was cool that there's a little bit of a window there. And he mentioned that he did like seeing that kind of fiery passion from Nick Nurse in that moment. Obviously, not the best way that you do want to display it, but having that level of passion and desire, I do think is notable to show players, and Nurse certainly wore his heart in his sleeve for that situation there. But ultimately, the biggest storyline here is still the fact that the Clippers did let the Sixers have a chance at Pual George. That I think the Clippers were really calling the bluff of, we don't believe you have any desire to truly leave Los Angeles, and we're going to keep pushing until you prove otherwise. And sometimes be careful what you wish for, because you will get it, as Pual George walked right out that door without them getting anything in return, became the first player in NBA history since 2019 to just up and leave a franchise and sign a max contract elsewhere. That being no strings attached, no sign and trade, no deal, whatever, that we've seen in this current ecosystem of the NBA, how much more likely it is for players to sign a long-term contract that they're maybe not even under the impression they will finish out with that organization, but that works for both sides, as that player is guaranteed that dollar figure, and that team is guaranteed not to let this player walk out the door for free and at least get something in return. Even think back to the James Harden situation last year with the Sixers team. He opted into his player option for over $30 million, not because he had any interest in playing for the Sixers. In fact, he was actively holding out from the team, but he wanted to lock in that dollar amount and then let the Sixers help get him to that destination. And a lot of that has to do with the cap structures as well. We do know we're seeing quite the crunch for the salary cap situation in the NBA. This specific CBA has been the most restrictive that I've seen. We're going to talk a lot more about that. That has been a great deal of the Daryl Morey game plan for the Sixers team, as he wanted to get to this offseason with as much flexibility as possible, that he wanted nothing on the books. When you look around the league, and the Clippers are a prime time example of this, is that there isn't that much flexibility because of how much you have committed already. And in past years, under previous CBAs, it essentially becomes the conversation, the talking point of, okay, well, we can make this happen. We'll just end up paying a little bit more on the tax bill, or have to pay a little more in the luxury tax, or whatever the conversation is. With this CBA, not quite the case, that there are far more implications, such as your draft pick having to be moved to the end of the first round, how you don't have a chance to do sign-in trades, pick up players on buyouts. All these types of restrictive points for building a team come on by spending too much. So I think this is really the summer where we're seeing that, and not just with Pual George. Klay Thompson is another great example of that, who ultimately the Warriors decided it was not worth to pay him that price due to the roster restrictions that are brought on by that dollar figure as it pertains to the team. Pual George, a very similar talking point here. So for Paul, I do respect that he did up and leave, that he did go and take himself where he feels value, which of course is being represented by that full-scale max contract. And I know for the criticisms, we all get caught up in these dollar figures and how crazy they are, because they absolutely are in that case. But it's more about, like, for these players feeling like they are being treated as they deserve, that they are being valued in the eyes of the organization in that kind of extent. I think that's really where things went south with Pual George and the Clippers, is he did not feel that proper type of commitment to himself and his game, even if he does believe that he dictated it. Now, things were not perfect for Paul George in a Clippers uniform. We're not going to act like he was this folk hero who won a championship and will have his jersey in the rafters. That ultimately is not how things went, even if that was the goal when he went here. But I am happy he has another chance in Philadelphia to rewrite his narrative. And I do think he has a perfect basketball fit alongside of him to truly put a ring on his finger and cement his legacy as it pertains to the NBA. So we will see what happens from there. But shout out to Paul George for letting us in on the behind the scenes for how that negotiation worked and everything that went down from there. I cannot wait to see him actually put on a Sixers uniform and play a little ball. We got plenty more to break down as Summer League is kicking off and the basketball world is churning once again. So appreciate you guys for tuning into this video here. If you haven't already, make sure you do smash that subscribe on the channel here. Drop a like on this video, any comments that you have below. I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.